last time I seen my dad was on Halloween 2009. He stopped answering my calls probably about 6:30 on Halloween night. Halloween that year fell on a Saturday. I started looking for him Sunday. I drove around Monday, all through the country outside Spartansburg, Union City, and Bartonia. And then on Tuesday, his friend called me from the corner of Elm by the library and said that he'd found Dad's van. And I said, well, is Dad in it? He said, I haven't went to it. And I rushed up there. When I got to the van, I went up on the driver's side. And when I looked in, I could see my dad laying on the floor in the back seat. I was screaming, my dad's dead. Someone's killed him.
Our dispatch center on November 3rd, around 5 o'clock, received a 911 call. And it was from Janice Cheadle that she had found her father. Patrick Cheadle was deceased in the back of a van.
Crime scene investigators, they're looking for cigarette butts, a soda can, anything that may have DNA to where they can then pinpoint potential suspects.
In this day and age, DNA, fibers, everything else, it's down to the minute, so we wanted to limit the amount of people within the actual scene. He was in the back of the van. There was a lot of blood in the hair and face, so we knew that it was a head wound. You can easily conclude someone usually doesn't die in that manner in the back of a vehicle. We knew we had a homicide.
Detectives are finding a few things that raise questions. There's no blood splatter inside of that van. Because of that, they know that this body has been moved from a place where this man was killed into the van and then parked in this area.
We processed the van. We took evidence. One of the bits of evidence was a cell phone that Mr. Cheadle had on his person. There was a significant amount of cash found.
Patrick Cheadle had $3,000 cash on him when they found his body. Apparently, he was supposed to go buy a car that evening that he went missing.
There was also some marijuana found in the back of the van. And eventually, we removed the body from the van and took it to the coroner's office. The autopsy determined it was probable that he died from a gunshot wound to the head, and that he was shot at fairly close range. Then he had abrasions of limestone, as if he had been drugged. And limestone is what your gravel driveways and a lot of your concrete is made of. They also saw inside his collar was dried vegetation. And we called in a botanist, and he identified it as a plantain weed. Very common, but the botanist said wherever he was drugged, this plant will be present.
It is bizarre. You have a murder on Halloween. The body being found on Elm Street, is there a connection to Halloween? Nobody knows. In 2009, Greenville, Ohio has a population of less than 13,000 people. This is not an ordinary situation for the people who live in a small community like this. They are scared.
We're the type of community where people still wave to you. So it's very small town, the charm is there. Greenville's very large, older homes, nice homes. Once you leave Greenville, it's vast farmland, so we are very rural. 1997 was the last homicide we had before this one.
People in Greenville, Ohio are terrified. So investigators need to find the person who did this, and you got to find them quickly. Obviously, the next step for detectives is questioning family members, trying to get leads to figure out what was going on right before Pat Cheadle was killed.
Janice Cheadle, the daughter of Patrick, made the phone call and made the discovery. She was in shock. She agreed to speak to me, though.
On Halloween, 2009, at approximately noon, I went over to see him at his friend's shop. He was talking about going to Spartansburg to buy a used car. And then I said, I'll see you later tonight. You're going to go to my sister's Halloween party, aren't you? Yeah, I'll see you later, you know. Hugged him, kissed him, told him I loved him, and that was it. My dad stopped answering my calls probably about 6:30 on Halloween night. My dad never showed up to the party. And then Sunday morning, I went to meet him, and he wasn't there. He hadn't answered me, which I thought was odd. It's not like my dad not to answer my calls or texts. Even if he was busy doing something, he would text me, say, busy, call you later. And I didn't get anything from him for days. I called his friend, and his friend hadn't heard from him either. I called my stepbrother. I called every jail and hospital in a 3-state radius just in case. I honestly just knew something bad happened because my gut told me, and with him not responding to me, I knew it was bad. We just started searching. And my dad's friends just happened to be coming back from Union City, and they took Elm Street and happened upon Dad's van. I just remember yelling and screaming and crying. And I was in the middle of the road and had to be picked up. It literally feels like your heart's been ripped out of your chest. I would describe my dad as a hippie. He was an old soul. He just was one of those relaxed, calm, cool, collective person most of the time.
He worked on trucks at a truck stop here nearby as a detailer.
That was like a hobby and a moneymaker for him. He took pride in his work. He would be polishing his trucks. He would listen to his classic rock, like the Leonard Skinner and ZZ Top. He was definitely from that era, and it stuck with him. He loved his classic rock. He was a truck driver for about 40 years, so he really wasn't home a lot. He was on the road probably 50 out of the 52 weeks. So when he was home, it was all about his family. He personally only had 2 kids, me and my sister. But when we were younger, he remarried, and we had 3 stepbrothers and a stepsister. My dad definitely was a family man. His mother meant everything to him. He was at his mom's at least once or twice a day, checking on her, or eating with her or something.
While investigators are talking to Patrick's mother, they find out there have been some threats that have come from Patrick's girlfriend's ex-husband.
It seemed that the ex-husband was clearly jealous of Pat and his relationship with his ex-wife.
My dad had a girlfriend for several years. But the ex-husband and the girlfriend weren't actually divorced at the time, they were separated, so there was anger. The ex-husband had told my dad to stay away from his wife. Otherwise, there's going to be trouble. He'd said it multiple times.
It was a fairly recent threat.
Cheadle's mom said, find this person, he probably knows something.
In her eyes, that was the person responsible for the death of her son.
We all know what Halloween's like. Kids going out, trick-or-treating, fake horror for everybody, haunted houses.
In Greenville, we have a Halloween parade, and the businesses will hand out candy, and the fire department's there. Very charming type stuff.
But this was something that really happened on Halloween on Elm Street, of all places, in Greenville, Ohio. Patrick Cheadle had been dead in a vehicle for days. And you had Cheadle's girlfriend's ex-husband telling Cheadle to stop messing with his ex.
We brought in Pat's girlfriend for an interview to see what she knew. We asked about who may have wanted to harm Patrick. She said her ex-husband, that's who she felt may have been responsible for Pat's death. Our next step was we brought in the ex-husband for an interview. He voluntarily came in. He admitted to having issues with Pat. Of course, he had a different story than what other people said. You know, he made it more of a two-way argument instead of just a one-way, but he had no qualms of saying that there were issues between the two. I don't think he showed any remorse on the death, but he did not show any indications that he was involved in the death. In the interview, he told us where he was at during Halloween, and his alibi did check out. The ex-husband was ruled out as a suspect.
Living in a small town, there was a lot of talk and speculation.
Every time there is a homicide anywhere, there are always rumors. Was this a robbery? Was this a drug deal? Was this somebody else who would have a reason to kill this man? And those are the questions that detectives immediately start to ask family members and his daughter, who was on the scene and made that 911 call.
I told Detective Roberts about how my dad was planning on going to buy a car the night before, and told him that the used car was actually a code for him going to buy marijuana, because they needed to know the truth so they could figure out what really happened to my father. My dad had approximately $13,000 on him to buy the car. He had it in a money bag, like a bank money bag. That's how he carried all his money.
She advised that he was going to have about $13,000, but we only found $3,000 on him. And then to find $3,000 cash on a robbery victim, yeah, it was confusing. We thought, well, maybe it wasn't going to be a robbery.
But then detectives get to see cell phone records.
The gold nugget we got was the cell phone. Because your phone tells a story. Tells you where you've been, who you've been in contact with.
Investigators find 3 calls on Halloween. A very important date because this is the last time anybody has seen Cheadle alive. 1 call comes from a landline, 2 other calls come from a cell phone.
The cell phone number traced back to a 19-year-old by the name of David Meisner, which was a little unusual that, Pat was 53 at the time and he was in contact with a 19-year-old.
The landline phone calls came from Bartonia, Indiana, across the state line about 20 minutes away. And they have to get the Randolph County Sheriff's Office involved too, as they go there and start investigating in that small little township of Bartonia.
The Greenville Police Department, Chief Roberts, he reached out to me, told me that they had went through some cell phone records.
And I just basically lay out everything we have, and then the names that we're giving, he knew them. Adam and Marcia Hargrove. They were definitely a person of interest. So we made a trip out there to the Hargrove house.
Investigators are really cautious when they're going to this home. The Randolph County Sheriff's Department has had run-ins with the people who lived there in the past.
I was familiar with the address. Even as a patrol officer, I had been there numerous times for domestic-related situations.
There has been some criminal activity involved with these folks, so they're just cautious. They don't want to do anything to cause any alarm. They don't want to do anything to put themselves in danger either.
It was very rural, very remote area, long lane. It was a husband, wife, and I believe a couple kids. It was oddly calm.
We went to the residence and spoke with the homeowners there. They were confused as to who Patrick Cheadle was. They weren't familiar with the green van. They weren't familiar with any of the questions that we were asking. But they consented to a search. So we basically started looking for any potential types of evidence there at the house that would indicate that that might have been where the crime occurred. Inside the house, there was a fireplace that had burned latex of some sort, and we believed that it might have been rubber gloves. Obviously odd, you don't see that a lot in somebody's fireplace in their home.
Investigators also find plantain, which matches the vegetation that was on Cheadle's shirt found at the coroner's office.
I would say within an hour or two, we had the actual search warrant and a crime tech from the Indiana State Police to use luminol. If sprayed onto a surface that has had blood on it, it will make it illuminate. When he sprayed it on the wooden deck at that property, you could physically see where the shooting occurred and then where a person had been drugged off of the porch. We knew we had our crime scene at that point. We decided to go ahead and take the deck apart. And as soon as we got the boards lifted up, we found a large pooling of blood. The crime scene tech gets a sample of that blood. And then once they did those tests, it was confirmed that it was Patrick Cheadle's blood.
Investigators have their crime scene now. It's on this couple's back porch. Obviously, they think these two people who live in this home are somehow involved. But the couple is adamant that they are not involved in Cheadle's murder at all.
Adam and Marcia said that on Halloween, during the time frame of the homicide, they were at a hospital in Indiana.
Detectives want to know how this blood splatter ended up on their back porch. Why is there a crime scene back there? And they don't know, could this couple be murderers? But investigators had no idea what was going to happen next, and it was a lot worse than they could have ever imagined.
Adam and Marcia said that during the time frame of the homicide, they were not home.
The couple is adamant that they had nothing to do with Cheadle's murder. They don't know how this blood splatter ended up on their back porch.
And their alibi was verified. Everything checked out. They did go visit a hospital in Indiana.
However, they then let investigators know that somebody had been staying in their house while he was having some trouble with his family.
The homeowner said that his cousin, Terry Durbin, had access to the house, and it was on again, off again, staying there.
The night that they came back home from Indianapolis, they found that Terry Durbin was there with a 19-year-old kid. The homeowners said that the 19-year-old was drinking beer and smoking marijuana.
This 19-year-old kid was David Meisner. And Meisner had called the cell phone that Mr. Cheadle had on his person. So things started coming together pretty quick.
The couple did tell us that Terry had left and was going to visit his brother up in Georgia. But prior to him leaving, they noted that he gave them some cash and that he got some repairs done to his vehicle. And they found it kind of odd because he had been kind of on hard times and did not have a lot of money, and suddenly he's got a lot of cash on him.
At that point, our focus turned to learning as much as we could about the cousin, Terry Durbin.
When investigators learned the name Terry Durbin, Durbin happens to be someone who knows Cheadle's stepson.
Terry Durbin and my stepbrother Derek grew up together in the same little town. So that's how my dad met Terry Durbin, was through my stepbrother.
Investigators start doing some background digging into him, and they find he sells pot and he has a violent temper.
One of our local police departments had told us that he was a suspect in the home invasion. They also indicated that he was a suspect in a bank robbery that had occurred in South Bend. Terry is a bad guy.
The investigators understand that there is this murderer going through their community, hiding somewhere, and potentially could strike again. While investigators are digging into Durbin's background, some people let them know there was a double murder in a small town called Mongo, about 2 hours north in Indiana.
I would describe my dad. He was a pretty boisterous guy. Very warm, very caring, very giving.
Terry Anderson and I ran around together and had a lot of fun. We liked fish and hunt and stuff like that.
Darlene, my stepmother, she was like a little butterfly. She was very soft-spoken. She had a really warm heart. My dad and Darlene had one child together, and that was Amanda Anderson. My dad worked for a tree service company. After Katrina, he decided to go down south to help with clearing out some of the trees and the damage. And he definitely was able to earn and save quite a bit of money.
He was working on having a side business and being a muskie tour guide. You know, and he says, I'm just gonna take $10,000 cash and I'm gonna get a brand new boat, but 2 feet longer.
And he did tell people that he had quite a bit of money to buy this boat. Maybe he could talk a little bit too much. The phone call came when I was at work that Darlene had been shot and is dead in the house, and they can't find Dad. When we got to Mongo, a detective came and started handing me personal items of my dad's. That's when he told me that my dad was found in the barn and he was deceased. And they said that they were murdered. It was violent. When you find out that a family member dies, it's hard just knowing that they're not here anymore. But for it to sink in that they were taken, violently taken, it has a different tone.
They didn't tell me where Terry was murdered. I found this out when we started walking onto the other side of the pole barn. This huge, huge round circumference of blood, thick, and Terry Anderson's hat was laying right there in this pool of blood. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Terry and Darlene were brutally beat. Terry's throat was cut.
And you can see the blood on the lawnmower and the blood on the ceiling. Looked like somebody did that. You know, the blood was wall to wall. Little pieces of scalp and stuff. And you can see where he put his handprint on the mower.
I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, this is where he was murdered? And they're like, yeah, you know. And I go, this is not good. I can't have my wife see this stuff. They said, I mean, we can have a cleanup service come in and clean it up. And I said, well, when will that happen? I don't know, maybe a couple of days, the investigator said. And I says, oh, I can't have Sherry see her dad here. Well, the investigator says, well, you can clean them up.
From my perspective, this case was poorly investigated. Investigators turned the crime scene over to the family immediately after only hours. They tell the family members that they can clean it up. Family members are panicked. They don't know what to do. So they start taking everything out of this house that has blood on it. They take out the carpet and burn all of this evidence, unknowingly thinking that investigators have everything they need. And there is a murderer on the loose, ready to strike again.
Terry Durbin worked at the tree trimming service with my dad. They worked quite closely. I met him on a few occasions.
He was a laborer and, you know, kind of an aid and assist. Putting brush or anything into the shredder, whatever it takes to get the job done. My father-in-law and I would be out in the barn. And a couple occasions, you know, Terry Durbin showed up just to talk.
If Durbin was indeed involved in those Mongo murders, as he is suspected to have been, it also appears that he didn't like to operate alone.
Terry Anderson's daughter, Amanda, you know, she had a meth addiction, I guess you could say, knowing to do meth, hanging around with meth friends, hanging out with Terry Durbin as well.
There is lots of speculation from family members and detectives as well that Amanda had a role in the death of her parents.
I suspected a possibility of my sister or her circle of friends. There was a lot of behaviors that I questioned about my sister. And the lack of trying to find out who murdered our father and her mother.
maybe it wasn't something where she expected them to be killed, but there was an incentive for her to get that money that her parents and her father in particular had just come up with.
My sister's possible involvement affected me very deep, and it still bothers me. It still hurts me just to thought.
This case had been cold already for 4 years before Terry Durbin's name comes up again in this murder of Patrick Cheadle. As it turns out, the two cases had quite a few similarities. From what I've gathered about Terry Durbin, everything's about money. And that's where these two cases really collide. Both of these men had cash on hand in their pockets. Both of these men were talking about the money that they had in their pockets.
My dad had lent Terry Durbin money, and I believe Terry Durbin had given my dad a check, and I don't think the check was a good check. And my dad had had a hard time and was angry with Terry Durbin with this loan.
We were told he was more than likely the person who committed the crimes in the Mongo murders.
When a crime occurs in a small community like that, the word spreads fast and people were scared.
I was hearing a bunch of rumors about Terry Durbin. The rumors on the street were about people he'd beat up and almost beat to death, who wouldn't ever testify or tell the cops who did it. I honestly was quite scared after this. I never had a gun in my house. I had a handgun that I slept with under my pillow because it was very scary.
People are terrified that there is a murderer on the loose in their community.
We knew we had a very bad guy, and we wanted to find these two people before someone else was going to get killed.
We didn't sleep. We'd get a couple hours and start out early in the morning. You know, we had the sheriff's office involved, and then we had Randolph County involved. Everybody worked for a common goal. We got the numbers, and we were able to track their cell phones, and we knew that Terry Durbin was going to Georgia. And Mr. Meisner, we pinged him up in Chicago. I made contact with David, and I called him. I introduced myself. I could tell that he was nervous. We then talked about the fact that he showed concern because Mr. Durbin wanted to meet him. And I kept telling him, do not meet him, because looking at the dynamics of the two, you could tell who was probably the leader and who was the follower. And I explained, if you meet with him, he's going to get rid of loose ends.
Investigators know Terry Durbin could strike again. It was just a matter of time.
I was very focused on getting those two in. We had a 53-year-old guy who we strongly believe was involved in another double homicides, who is experienced in the world of crime, and we had a 19-year-old kid who was foolish enough to follow the lead of Terry Durbin.
We decided to just call Terry Durbin and David Meisner, just call them initially to see if they would cooperate and come back and speak with us. And shockingly, both agreed to return. However, Terry said that he needed to take care of some personal business before he would return.
David Meisner's mother had already got him an attorney, and he had X amount of time to turn himself in, or I told him that, we would start looking for him, and that would not be good. In my thought process, Mr. Durbin wanted to meet Mr. Meisner to kill Meisner. And I think he knew that. I think he figured that out. He was scared. So he did come in. Meisner was ready to talk.
He looked like a scared kid to me. He told us they had set up a drug deal. They were selling 3 pounds of marijuana, and the asking price was $9,000 to $10,000.
He was chosen, which with the similarities with Mongo comes because he was going to have cash on hand. Pat was there to buy $10,000 worth of marijuana that did not exist. Instead of it being a marijuana purchase, it was a robbery, and the robbery turned into a homicide.
David Meisner did not know the person personally who was coming, and he said that when he arrived, there was a green van that came down the driveway, and that Terry Durbin had went to answer the door. While Terry was outside, he hears a pop that he recognizes as a gunshot. He told us that Terry came back in the house pointing the gun at him, telling him to come help him where he was next. He told us that Terry Durbin then used a hose to clean blood off the deck.
They drugged the body to the van. Durbin drove the van with Patrick Cheadle in the back. Mr. Meisner was behind him. They dumped him off at Elm Street. And then they drove back to the residence. And later on, that's when the homeowners did come home, and he found that they were drinking.
David Meisner also told us that prior to him and Terry separating ways, Terry gave him $2,000 in cash. David Meisner also did tell us that he purchased the gun, and he told us that he didn't know a murder was going to occur. I mean, he thought it was going to be a robbery.
Investigators now have what they believe is enough evidence to arrest both Meisner and Durbin.
Shortly after, we were contacted by Terry Durbin's attorney, and the attorney made it clear to us that he had talked to his client and he did not wish to talk with law enforcement. We explained to him we were taking him into custody, and we still had enough reason to believe that he was involved in the murder.
On November 12, 2009, 2 weeks after the murder of Patrick Cheadle, Terry Durbin is finally arrested and charged with his murder. David Meisner, also arrested, also charged in the murder of Patrick Cheadle. David Meisner cooperated with investigators, cooperated with the prosecution, and he was treated as a friendly witness. He still got charged with murder. He still got charged with robbery. However, the prosecution and the state made a deal, sentenced him to 20 years in prison. Durbin denied everything, claimed he was completely innocent. The trial was in 2010. All of Cheadle's family was there. They brought in a slew of character witnesses describing Terry Durbin's behavior, his temper. On October 29th, jury goes into deliberations. They spend only 6 hours, and they come back with guilty on both charges, murder and armed robbery.
When the jury said guilty, I actually teared up. I mean, it was like a huge feeling of relief. And I know what it did for the family, you know. But Patrick Cheadle's still somebody's dad.
They took my rock from me. They took my father. They took my kid's grandpa. They don't get to experience and build memories like I did with my dad. They took a son. They took a caregiver from my grandma away.
I believe that Pat Cheadle could have still been alive if we'd been able to nab Terry Durbin in my family's case.
We were told that he was the suspect in the Mongo murders, but they would not try a circumstantial case. They wanted more physical evidence that would tie him there. They just thought it wasn't a case they could try and win, is what I was told.
Whoever did it, they should pay for it. Every single day, I have to wake up knowing what happened to my family. I mean, they beat them. They beat them to where they couldn't even have an open casket. It's the violence that really bothers me the most. That's what really, really, really hurts, how they died. It's not a matter that they died, it's how. It's so hard. It's so hard.
He's the first and only person that I've registered with the prisons with that I want to know if he's released, if he escapes, that they'll personally call my cell phone and tell me. I want to know where he's at all times. He's where he needs to be. And I pray that the Andersons are able to get justice in their case.
California, September 16th, 2003. Riverside Sheriff's Department received reports of a body in a pickup truck just outside the city of Paris.
I heard the call go out, a dead body in a vehicle in the area of Markham and Indian Avenue.
There were at least 35 stab wounds on the victim. It was overkill, and usually overkill is a personal thing.
The victim is 40-year-old construction worker Thomas Della Riva, who was last seen leaving for work with his teenage nephew, Hugo.
Hugo and Thomas left for work about 3:30 in the morning. The truck broke down, and Thomas stayed at the truck.
Police begin to question onlookers who have gathered at the scene.
And I'm thinking, who found this guy? And it's like, well, the wife found him. I just thought it was kind of strange.
Further investigation throws up more questions for detectives as they uncover a secret love triangle involving the victim.
I guess love does crazy things to people, and you throw in sex, and it really, really makes them do some crazy things.
Jealousy can go a long way to help people commit crimes, even murder.
The city of Paris in Riverside County, California, is located 70 miles east of Los Angeles.
When I first started, it was still an agricultural area, basically. It was a lot of wheat and barley and livestock out here. But now it's hugely grown. It's a lot of industry, a lot of homes.
In 2003, Paris had a very high crime rate. Back then, it was kind of a corridor for drug trafficking coming up from Mexico and then throughout the United States. It's improved quite a bit since then.
Riverside at the time was like the Wild West. It was away from the major cities of Los Angeles, San Diego, Orange County.
Predominantly Hispanic and Black at the time. As you go north into the county areas, then the white population is a little more dispersed.
On the morning of September 16th, 2003, officers from Riverside Sheriff's Department receive a 911 call. A body has been discovered on the outskirts of Paris.
They notified us around 8:30, 8:35. We got there maybe 20 minutes later.
I was actually driving into the office, and I got a call from the sergeant, said, hey, we have a homicide in the rural area of Paris. I need you to respond out there.
Officers arrive at the scene and find a crowd has already gathered.
I've been to a lot of homicides, and there was something different about this scene. When I got there, it was just a lot of people just close around where the body was. We need to get these people out of here.
It's an industrial complex. There's no real residences around there. It's all industrial buildings.
There was a red Dodge pickup truck parked behind the trees off the road, and that's where the body was located.
Directly across the street from it was a concrete manufacturing facility. Somebody from the concrete facility heard a woman screaming. Quite a few people from the concrete plant walked across the street and they discovered that the victim was deceased in the truck.
Investigators move the crowd back and begin assessing the scene.
There would be a briefing once the homicide unit got there. All the facts that have been developed probably up to that point to give the homicide guys and girls something to go with, so they have an idea of what's going on.
And then from there, we got assignments. We had case agents and then a scene person.
I received a phone call from Riverside Sheriff Department. They were at the scene of a death and requested I respond.
You got to consider everything as evidence. You get pretty much one opportunity to go through and collect that evidence.
As we walked in and do our walkthrough, I saw a red truck on the side of the road. The door was open and I saw a deceased male on the floor, covered in blood.
There was a body that looked like a Hispanic male with his head kind of at the passenger door area and his feet towards the driver's side or where the gas and foot pedals would be.
He was laying face down, knees up to his chest on the floorboard of the vehicle.
There was a large amount of blood that was obviously visible, and it looked fresh, like it had just happened or fairly recently.
The victim is 40-year-old construction worker Thomas Della Riva.
We removed the clothing for protection so they could examine it closely later. And we did notice that there was considerable wounds on his back and front, face, neck, hands, torso. They located a knife and a cigarette lighter in the ground next to the driver's door of the truck.
We took our scene photographs and then we walked out of the scene. And then we said, okay, we need to start interviewing some people.
I assigned a deputy to take a digital camera and photograph every person that was anywhere near the crime scene. And then we also had them photograph the actual sole of their shoes because they had been walking around, so we could try to match shoe prints and shoe impressions from around the area of the truck.
Investigators quickly learn that some of the victim's close relatives are nearby.
Some of the family members, including the wife, were at the scene.
Since it was Spanish speaking, I was assigned to do the translation and do all the interviews in Spanish.
Our interviews, we always like to conduct them in a formal setting. And eventually they always do get to a formal setting, but it might be something as simple initially as a field interview, just to get some information.
Officers now learn that it was Tomas's wife, Maria Della Riva, and her sister, Sylvia Reyes, who discovered Tomas's truck that morning and made the 911 call.
And I asked Maria, what happened to your husband? And she said, well, you know, he left and didn't come back, and I don't know what happened to him. Then, you know, I went looking for him, and I found him.
Around 6 a.m., she and her sister, Sylvia, left for work, and she tells her sister that Thomas's truck had broken down when he left for work earlier that morning, and that she was concerned something had happened to him. They decided to go looking for him. Sometime between 7 and 8 a.m. that day, they find his truck, and they find Mr. De La Riva on his stomach on the floor of the truck. He had been stabbed 33 times.
It was the wife that was the one that was screaming that got the attention of the people from the concrete factory next door.
Detectives invite Maria and Sylvia back to the station for a formal interview, hoping to understand more about Thomas and his last known movements.
After her initial interview, I actually transported the wife of the victim back to our station, and she was interviewed by Detective Masson.
I said, are you involved in any way in the demise of your husband? And no, you know, and oh, okay. He went to work with Hugo, my nephew, through marriage. My husband usually takes him to work.
Tomas Della Riva's nephew Hugo traveled from Mexico to the United States 1 year earlier and was living with Thomas, his wife Maria, and their children.
Hugo eventually showed back up at the house, but without the victim. Hugo stated that the truck broke down and that his uncle was left there with the truck, And Hugo walked back to the house.
A short time later, Hugo returns home and informs Tomas's wife, Maria de la Riva, that their truck broke down and he needs water to fix it.
He came back, he said the car overheated, got 3 bottles of water, and he left. And then from there, he called and said, hey, I can't find them. Uncle Tomas is not there anymore, and he probably went to another family member's house, but I have to go to work. So he went off to a relative named Aaron, who took him to Orange County to work.
Hugo's boss is Maria de la Riva's brother, Aaron Reyes.
We knew that Hugo was the last person to see the victim alive.
Aaron and Hugo are together, and I said, well, they need to come back. We need to talk to them.
So we called Hugo's boss in Orange County and asked if Hugo would be willing to come back and meet with us.
Aaron drives Hugo back from Orange County to the police station in Paris.
I talked to Aaron before I talked to Hugo, and he's like, I brought him back, and he's waiting for you guys. We need to find out exactly what's going on here.
Officers hope that Hugo can assist them with their investigation.
I bring Hugo into the interview room and I ask him, what happened? And he goes, well, I woke up early. My uncle always takes me over to Aaron's house to drive off to work. And then what happened to that? He goes, well, we were driving to Aaron's house. The car overheated. Where did it overheat at? Overheated at Wilson. Would you be able to take us to there? It shows where, oh, sure, I'll take you guys. So at that time, we get in the car with Hugo, and he takes us down to the location. And he says, well, this is where the car overheated. There was some scuff marks where the tires like that. So that's all consistent with what he told us. And where do you think your uncle went after that? I don't know. What'd you do? He goes, well, I went home to get some water, okay? And did you see anyone? Well, I saw my nephew, Esteban, who eventually ended up giving me a ride back to Aaron's house to take me to work because we couldn't find my uncle. I said, okay. So we take him back to the station. We put him in the interview room now.
Hugo's uncle Aaron now reveals some important information to investigators.
Aaron comes up to me and says, hey, I just want to let you know, when we told him that his body was found, there was no reaction. There's something going on here. I'm like, okay. And he goes, also, I just want to let you know that Hugo and Maria were having some type of sexual relationship. They were having an affair right underneath his uncle's eyes, and he was aware of the affair. It was no secret.
This startling new piece of information about Hugo's affair with his aunt Maria gives police their first serious lead in their investigation into the brutal murder of Tomas de la Riva. September 16th, 2003, Riverside County, California. The bloodied body of construction worker Tomas de la Riva is discovered in his red pickup truck on the outskirts of the city of Paris. Tomas left his home earlier that morning to go to work with his nephew Hugo de la Riva, who was living with Tomas and his family at the time. Detectives have discovered Hugo has been having an affair with his aunt Maria.
We found out that there was a secretive relationship that was going on the side behind the victim's back.
Talked to Hugo. I have no idea what happened to my uncle. Last time I saw him, he was alive, was waiting for me. He probably went to a relative's house. Well, what relative do you have around there? Well, I don't know. Maybe it was one of his relatives. Well, wouldn't one of his relatives be one of your relatives? Now he's getting a little frustrated. The answers he's giving me is not matching. He still sticks with the story. I have no idea.
The interview with Hugo is suddenly interrupted by an unexpected development.
After the initial interview with Maria, Detective Masson asked for somebody to sit in the room with her. While that officer was sitting in the room with her, she began to make some spontaneous statements. And so the officer came to me and I notified Detective Masson.
Maria wants to talk to you. She's saying that he came back and he raped her in a room.
Maria's serious accusation against Hugo changes the attitude of the investigators.
Like sit down with Maria and tell me exactly what happened when he came home. When he came home, I was in my room, and he came in, he was completely naked. Did he have any blood on him or anything? Well, he was washing his clothes. How about his boots? And she said, well, he washed his boots outside.
But inconsistencies in Maria's story begin to raise doubts in the minds of the investigators.
She's all over the place. Her story just doesn't match. She's telling me details where the boots are. She's probably there watching them. There's something going on. I asked her, do you think Hugo had something to do with the demise of your husband? And she says, I think he did. I said, well, why would you? Well, we've been having a sexual relationship for a long time. I said, I'm going to take you back, have you sit with your family. Please don't discuss anything with anyone.
Her story didn't appear to match kind of what was going on with the whole totality of the evidence that we had there, and things were just a little bit off.
From there, I go back into the interview room with Hugo. And I say, I think we have a little issue here. Have you been having a relationship with your aunt? And he kind of looks at me and says, well, yeah, we have. Why didn't you tell me that before? And he's like, well, I didn't think it was important. He starts kind of backpedaling a little bit. And I'm like, well, it is important. Honestly, I don't think what happened this morning is what you're telling me.
The tone of questioning now takes a dramatic turn in an attempt by investigators to find out what happened in the hours and days prior to the fatal attack on Thomas.
I'm letting him tell me a story because some of the story's true that he's telling me. Other parts, it's not. But, it's his story.
You want to kind of make him at ease, and then at some point you are going to transition into a serious interrogation and at some point get accusatory and try to elicit information with the facts that you've developed up to that point.
Eventually, I start breaking him down where I had to read him his Miranda rights. He waived his rights and wanted to talk to me.
Hugo tells investigators about the abusive and violent relationship between his uncle and aunt and how it sparked the idea of murdering Thomas.
He came up with the story that, yes, they were having a sexual relationship. He hated his uncle because he would beat the kids and would beat Maria. He just didn't like that. And him and Maria got really close, and that's how they started the relationship. And, Maria wanted me to kill him.
There had been this plan or this scheme to murder her husband so that they could be together.
She'd get an argument with her husband, Tomas, and then she'd come back and tell him, let's kill him. And then, of course, Hugh would get all excited. They would have sex. And after sex, she would say, something, why don't we just hold off on that for another day? The cycle would start again. And this goes on for a long time.
Enraged by a feeling of helplessness, Hugo now makes a fateful decision that will change everyone's lives.
Hugo finally gets to the point where he's like, I'm just going to kill him. And she's like, well, if you're going to kill him, you do it. Keep me out of it. Don't get me involved. Well, I think it's a little too late for that.
Hugo explains to investigators the planning that went into killing his uncle.
Hugo told investigators that he had asked to borrow $1,500 from Maria and that Thomas wouldn't notice that the money was gone, and that she gave him the money and that he used this money to pay a guy named Armando to kill Thomas.
Even in today's world, the hiring of a hitman is very rare. And $1,500, even in 2003 money, that's pretty cheap.
He describes Armando. He says Armando's the one who stabbed him. He's the one that did everything, not me. I was there.
Hugo's in the front seat, and this Armando guy is in the back seat behind Thomas, who was driving. While they're driving, they stop on Wilson. Armando wraps a cord around Thomas's neck and strangles him and starts stabbing him.
Well, what's your uncle doing? My uncle's screaming out, Hugo, help me, Hugo, help me. Car comes to a stop. I get out of the truck, and I go around, but it's too late. My uncle's dead. And what do? Well, I just go home. He's describing how his uncle's being stabbed consisted of him stabbing his uncle.
Then Hugo tells the investigator, after he leaves and walks back home, Armando drives off in the vehicle with the victim.
Hugo's startling account of Thomas's murder stuns investigators. But more unexpected revelations quickly follow.
By that time, I'm getting pagers. I come out of the room. So I come out of the room and they're like, hey, go talk to Maria again. She wants to tell you some more.
Suspicion now falls on Maria Della Riva and her role in the murder of her husband, Thomas.
I need to put Maria in an interview room because she's a suspect now. So I get her in an interview room and I said, Maria, I need to read your rights. She waives her rights and she tells me a story about, yeah, we've been in a relationship, but I do love my husband. We have kids together and the whole thing, but we just don't have a good relationship. And I confide in Hugo and that's how our relationship started. So she tells me everything, the thing leading up to that morning.
Maria now gives a different version of events of what happened earlier that morning.
I woke him up to go to work, and the last thing I told Hugo was, don't do nothing to him. I don't want to get involved. She's minimizing a little bit, not probably telling us the truth, because she knew what was going on. She sends him off to work. She goes back to bed, knowing that her husband's going to get killed.
A short while later, Hugo returns to the house and wakes Maria.
He comes back, he's naked, and he jumps on top of me and takes my clothes off. What are you wearing? So, well, I'm wearing my shorts. What happened after that? You know, he just got up and called Esteban to take him over to Aaron's house.
Maria's clothing also raises the suspicions of the officers.
She's in a sweatsuit. I asked Maria, where's your shorts? You told me you were in shorts this morning. Well, I took them off after we made love. There's a big difference between sex and love.
More information about the troubled family dynamic emerges from an unlikely source. Maria's sister Sylvia now asks to speak to investigators.
I said, Sylvia, I was told that you want to talk to me. She goes, yeah, I think my sister and Hugo were involved in the death of her husband. I'm like, okay, well, what makes you think that? She goes, they've been having an affair for a long time. I said, well, how do you know? She said, well, Maria told me. How about Tomas? Does he know? She goes, well, I was at a quinceanera, which is a Sweet 15 type party, and I confided to Tomas and I said, hey, just to let you know, Hugo and Maria are having a sexual relationship. And Tomas says, I know they've been having it, and I told him to break it off, but I'm afraid if they leave, the kids are going to leave, she's going to leave, and, you know, I'm left here by myself. So I just kind of left it alone.
Investigators are getting closer to finding out what really happened earlier that morning to Thomas Della Riva, but many questions remain unanswered.
Once they told me the whole story, I went back to Hugo and I said, okay, Hugo, we got some serious problems here. I don't think there's Armando. I think you're the one who probably stabbed your uncle to death. So he kind of breaks down a little bit. I hate him. You know, he beat the kids, he beat her, and, you know, but it wasn't me. I was there. It wasn't me.
Hugo now accuses Maria of paying for the murder of her husband, Thomas Della Riva.
She gave me $1,500, and we were planning to use that money to give to Armando to kill my uncle. Well, where's the money at? Well, my car got towed. It got impounded because I didn't have a license. I'm like, okay, you're telling me all this stuff, but did you give the money to Armando? I said, well, I approached Armando a long time ago, and he said, yes, I'll kill him, but it'll cost you $1,500. So I was giving him $50 here, $25 here, and I'm thinking, buddy, that doesn't make sense. Are we going to find Armando? Well, yes, you are.
Investigators must now find Armando and establish his role in the murder of Thomas Della Riva. Perris, Riverside County, California. 40-year-old construction worker Thomas Della Riva has been found murdered in his pickup truck by the side of the road. Detectives have uncovered an affair between his wife Maria and his teenage nephew Hugo. Hugo has admitted to planning his uncle's murder with a man called Armando.
Homicide detectives transported Hugo to a location where Hugo identified where Armando lived. We arrived out at that scene. One of the deputy district attorneys went with us. We froze the residence in anticipation of getting a warrant for it.
I mean, we talked to the roommate that lived in the trailer with him. Oh, he left a couple days. I haven't seen him in a couple days, so that's kind of strange. I'm thinking, wait a minute.
We actually asked all the people that were at the house whether they'd be willing to come back to the Pear Station to be interviewed, which they did. Armando was not identified as a suspect in this case.
Armando could have been just another person. He probably just threw the name out there.
With Armando now firmly ruled out as a suspect, investigators choose an unusual tactic to try and unravel the web of lies being spun by Hugo and Maria.
I go back to Hugo, and I say, you're pointing a finger at her, she's pointing a finger at you. You probably need to talk to Maria. You probably need to kind of set this straight. I went to Maria and I said, Hugo wants to talk to you. You okay with that? She goes, yeah, I want to talk to him. I'm fine with that.
Maybe something's just not clicking. We'll put those two people together in a room, and they'll start talking, whispering, and that's being monitored.
I brought Hugo in and I said, Maria's sitting there. Hugo, I want you to sit over here. I don't want you guys walking towards each other. Please talk, but there's no touching.
And you're watching for just little things that are suspicious, and you use that information against them.
They start talking to each other. He tells Maria, why did you say everything? I was going to take the blame for it. And Maria's like, well, I told you not to do it. You know, I told you not to get me involved. I told you not to do it. And they're talking details about the murder. Hugo, a couple times, got up and started walking towards her. Of course, I'm sitting there watching it. So I go in there and I kind of make it look like I'm not watching, you know, because they don't know we're watching. Knock on the door. I go in. And I'm like, I told you guys, I don't want you doing that. Getting close. I need you to sit here. I need you to sit over there. That's it. So I break them up and they start talking again. Hugo ended up wanting a hug from her, and obviously she didn't want nothing to do with him. That got close to the point we were able to break it up and put them back in their corners so they could talk again. And that went to the point where, okay, we got enough.
Investigators now believe they have enough evidence to arrest Hugo and Maria for the murder of Thomas Della Riva.
We told them, you're under arrest for the homicide of your husband, the homicide of your uncle.
You still have to corroborate that. You have to take your bits and pieces of evidence that you've developed, and you finally get to a point, it may not all be done, but you can see the picture, and you just take it from there.
I booked them into Robert Presley Detention Center, which is downtown Riverside. From there, they could have been moved anywhere within Riverside County.
With Hugo and Maria now in custody, investigators must gather all the evidence available to them to build the strongest possible case.
In Riverside County, when we have a homicide, we have a team of 5 people. You have a lead investigator, a case agent, you have someone who's going to process the scene, and then you have 2 extra investigators that will canvass or help process the scene also.
We had gone to Winchester for the original Armando search warrant. Then we also went to an address on Hennessy in the city of Paris, which is where Maria and the victim lived. Froze the location in anticipation of a search warrant.
I authored the search warrant. We went later on that day and processed the house with one of our forensic technicians.
Investigators conduct a detailed crime scene investigation of Thomas and Maria Della Riva's home to gather crucial evidence in the case.
I want to search Hugo's room. I want to search the room where apparently the rape occurred. I collected the shorts, the clothing in the washer, the boots that did have blood on them.
Another piece of evidence provides investigators with an insight into Hugo's mental state prior to the killing of his uncle.
Hugo had a drawing sketch of Maria on cardboard in his room.
Clearly, there was a lot of emotion, passion involved. She could have just said, hey, you're my nephew. I don't want nothing to do with you. Let's just break this off. This is not appropriate.
I think she played a critical role in it. Had it not been for her and her affair, the victim would probably be alive today.
Riverside County Coroner's Office now conducts a detailed autopsy of Thomas Della Riva's body as part of the investigation into his murder.
The deputy coroner, when he runs into a death of this nature, he carries that with him through other deaths and other situations. It both steadies himself and it gives him experience that say, hey, I saw this before. This happened in this case, and it matches exactly this case. We bring the body in, and the body's unclothed, photographed, washed front and back. If we need to, we do x-rays, provide those to the doctor doing the examination. Some start with the head, some start with the hands, but they examine everything.
The autopsy reveals the brutal injuries sustained by Thomas in the final moments of his life.
Generally, a report is maybe 1 or 2 pages. I think in this case, he wrote like 10 pages. There are several defensive marks on his hands where he tried to protect himself. Injuries to his back, injuries to his head, injuries to his face. At one point, there was a pressure put on his neck, and we saw those by petechia in his eye, which is a hemorrhage in his eyes from that particular movement.
The high number of stab wounds found on Thomas's body indicates a personal connection between him and his killer.
Whenever you have knives and cutting edges, it becomes very personal.
An angry person wants them to be hurt, and this is what he was doing. A killer would just hit you once in the heart and you're dead, but that's something that's personal.
To be able to conjure up the ability or the courage to actually strangle somebody and watch the life just kind of slowly slip away from them, that's pretty personable.
Detective Masson identified Hugo and Maria as the suspects in this case.
Hugo and Maria Della Riva are now formally charged with the murder of Thomas Della Riva.
Both of them were charged with 187 of California Penal Code, which is murder.
September 2003. Maria Della Riva and her nephew Hugo Della Riva have been charged with the murder of Maria's husband, Thomas.
Maria initially denied knowing anything about how her husband was killed and why and who did it. But later she recanted and admitted that she had been having an affair with Hugo and that he had told her he wanted to kill Thomas.
She went along with him. She, at times, would approach him and say, I want you to kill him. She would turn him on, turn him off, turn him off, turn him on, to the point where Hugo said, hey, you know something? I just need to take care of this and do away with him.
He wanted Maria for himself. Probably didn't like the fact that husband and wife were still living and sleeping together.
Under police questioning, Hugo accuses his friend Armando of killing his uncle Thomas.
Hugo tells the investigator that he and Thomas and this Armando guy get in the truck. And as they're driving, Hugo's in the front seat, Thomas is driving. This Armando guy is supposedly sitting in the rear seat behind the driver, behind Thomas. As they come to a stop on Wilson, Armando, according to Hugo, wraps a cord around Thomas's neck and strangles him and then starts stabbing him.
Hugo and Maria are both charged with the murder of Thomas Della Riva. They are detained and booked into the county jail while awaiting trial.
I did go see him one other time in the jail. We showed him a picture of Armando. We ended up identifying him. It's just him. He said, yeah, that's him. Okay, at least we have a identification of the guy.
But investigators quickly rule out this false lead and focus in on the real killers.
Armando was not ever a suspect.
To this day, I don't even know if they even found that guy. I don't even know if he was involved in that.
This inter-family crime of passion shocks a community familiar with violence and murder.
That relationship was going on for a long time. A lot of the family members knew that was going on. From what the family members told me during the investigation, Tomas knew that his wife was having a sexual relationship with the nephew.
But nobody could have predicted the shocking and deadly events this bizarre love affair would ultimately lead to.
People might think about doing certain things, but they don't carry through. And then there are those people that they think about it, they plan it, and then they carry through. They're willing to step over the edge. That's always a pretty crazy to think. How does one get to that level?
Family members knew the relationship was going on, but they didn't think it was going to go to that level of killing a family member.
The human heart can be a dangerous thing. You just never know in situations like this what can happen. Certainly the victim didn't know. And it does beg questions. Why would you continue associating with your nephew who's having an affair with your wife? You know about this.
Love is very strong, and he felt very strong about his wife and keeping the family together. At one time, Maria and Tomas probably did love each other. They had a good family, but over time, that deteriorated to the point where she relied on Hugo to comfort her, and that's how the relationship started.
Investigators continue building their case against Hugo and Maria de la Riva.
And there's no doubt that Hugo was the guy who did the stabbing. Maria was not the actual person physically doing it, but this whole thing happened because of her relationship. She's the focal point.
Anytime you get a confession, it's good. I always liked not just having a confession, but have them reenact it. Tomas did reenact what happened in that cab of that truck. So I had a confession and I had a reenactment from him. Maria just confessed, and that was it.
She knew of the plan, and she was a part of that plan it, and helped try to cover it up initially till all this evidence against him was exposed. There was really no more defending that they could do to protect themselves.
The district attorney makes the decision to hold a joint trial for Hugo and Maria.
Typical courtroom, you had one side of the family on one side, and then the other side you have the responding officers, myself, the interview, the forensic techs, the deputy coroner that went out there, a handful of witnesses, a couple family members that supports Hugo and Maria, and they keep them separated.
Prosecutors must establish a high degree of planning on the part of Hugo to ensure he faces the full force of the law.
Was the case premeditated? Clearly it was. Obviously, Hugo knew he was going to be getting his ride to work and had to pick a date and a time and a location where he ultimately committed the crime, and so that took a little bit of planning and preparation. Certainly did not appear to be anything that was spontaneous.
I don't think there were any signs or information where he was mistreated by his uncle or anything. When one is willing to murder a close family member that's always been good to you, I think that takes it to a whole different level.
The prosecution must also present a convincing case to the jury about Maria's involvement in the brutal murder of her husband, Thomas.
There were red flags from the very beginning. You just don't get that many homicides where the husband leaves to go to work and then somehow the wife shows up at the scene to discover this truck at a fairly remote location. How does she wind up there?
There's like an old saying that suspect returning to the crime scene, which happens frequently, and it's done in the hopes of maybe throwing off the investigation that, why would I show back up where my deceased husband's at? And this was one of those cases.
As the police, right, we have a threshold that we have to meet, which is the probable cause threshold to make these arrests. Obviously, the prosecution has a separate set that they need to evaluate the case with. Giving that much evidence that, hey, what have you told the police? What did you tell them? I think it kind of displays the level of guilt, right, and their participation in this crime.
The jury retires to deliberate the verdict in the case. They return to court and find both defendants guilty on all counts of the charges against them.
From the time the investigators picked up the case, the evidence led them right to the two suspects. They were both tried and convicted. It's about as strong a case of justice being served as we can expect under the circumstances and looking at the facts of the case.
When these cases are put together, they go to the district attorney and their chiefs. They have what's called a staffing, and they sit down and they discuss what is it that we can prove. Can we do the death penalty? Clearly, it was a first-degree murder, right? He could have been eligible for the death penalty.
Hugo de la Riva was sentenced to life without parole. Maria de la Riva was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
Maria just got 25 years to life. 25 years later, she would be eligible for parole.
For the de la Riva family, the pain and sadness of their loss will never heal.
It's sad. Family is left behind, children are left behind, without a father, without a mother, knowing what happened, that, mother was having a sexual relationship with a nephew, and the nephew ended up killing dad. The kids are old enough now that they probably know what happened. They were old enough then.
It's very odd to have a nephew having an affair with a married woman and then ultimately killing the husband.
But many questions remain for those left behind. And could a crime like this have been avoided?
He wanted her, and it came down to jealousy that I want Maria. I had to get rid of my uncle to be with Maria.
They wanted something, and they were so desperate for it that they were willing to commit a murder to be together.
How he would think that would happen, how he would think in his mind that this is going to work out, that, his uncle's going to be out of the picture and he's just going to take the place of his uncle with her, that's for him to tell you.
The thorough investigation by the homicide team ensures justice is served in this case.
It's just being tenacious about your investigation to really dig into the stories that they're giving you, and does it make sense? And if it doesn't make sense, then okay, we'll figure out why. Whether that's follow-up interviews, whether that's matching the evidence that's at the scene to what they're telling you.
The thing that stands out most are the number and severity of the injuries. It was a crime of passion, basically. That was their ace card. There's more to it than this, yeah.
To me, it was just kind of like, I'm just doing my job. I want to get as much as possible in there, because at the end of the day, I don't want something to say, well, we didn't do this, or this wasn't done, or we didn't get enough evidence on her. She was a victim of this, and obviously she was not.
I'm sure that his family is appreciative that the people responsible for this are spending time in prison.
For countless ways, I think about you, baby.
finally gets to the point where he's like, I'm just gonna kill him. And she's like, well, if you're gonna kill him, you do it, keep me out of it, don't get me involved. Well, I think it's a little too late for that.
Hugo explains to investigators the planning that went into killing his uncle.
Hugo told investigators that he had asked to borrow $1,500 from Maria and that Thomas wouldn't notice that the money was gone, and that she gave him the money and that he used this money to pay a guy named Armando to kill Thomas.
Even in today's world, the hiring of a hitman is very rare. And $1,500, even in 2003 money, that's pretty cheap.
He describes Armando. He says Armando's the one who stabbed him. He's the one that did everything, not me. I was there.
Hugo's in the front seat, and this Armando guy is in the back seat behind Thomas, who was driving. While they're driving, they stop on Wilson. Armando wraps a cord around Thomas's neck and strangles him and starts stabbing him.
Well, what's your uncle doing? My uncle's screaming out, Hugo, help me, Hugo, help me. Car comes to a stop. I get out of the truck, and I go around, but it's too late. My uncle's dead. And what do? Well, I just go home. He's describing how his uncle's being stabbed consisted of him stabbing his uncle.
Then Hugo tells the investigator, after he leaves and walks back home, Armando drives off in the vehicle with the victim.
Hugo's startling account of Thomas's murder stuns investigators, but more unexpected revelations quickly follow.
By that time, I'm getting pagers. I come out of the room. So I come out of the room, and they're like, hey, go talk to Maria again. She wants to tell you some more.
Suspicion now falls on Maria Della Riva and her role in the murder of her husband, Thomas.
I need to put Maria in an interview room because she's a suspect now. So I get her in an interview room, and I said, Maria, I need to read your rights. She waives her rights, and she tells me a story about, yeah, we've been in a relationship, but I
think about
love. There's a big difference between sex and love.
More information about the troubled family dynamic emerges from an unlikely source. Maria's sister Sylvia now asks to speak to investigators.
I said, Sylvia, I was told that you want to talk to me. She goes, yeah, I think my sister and Hugo were involved in the death of her husband. I'm like, okay, well, what makes you think that? She goes, they've been having an affair for a long time. I said, well, how do you know? She said, well, Maria told me. How about Tomas? Does he know? She goes, well, I was at a quinceanera, which is a Sweet 15 type party, and I confided to Tomas, and I said, hey, just to let you know, Hugo and Maria are having a sexual relationship. And Tomas says, I know they've been having it, and I told him to break it off, but I'm afraid if they leave, the kids are gonna leave, she's gonna leave, and I'm left here by myself. So I just kind of left it alone.
Investigators are getting closer to finding out what really happened earlier that morning to Thomas Della Riva, but many questions remain unanswered.
Once they told me the whole story, I went back to Hugo and I said, okay, Hugo, we got some serious problems here. I don't think there's Armando. I think you're the one who probably stabbed your uncle to death. So he kind of breaks down a little bit. I hate him. He beat the kids, he beat her, and but it wasn't me. I was there, it wasn't me.
Hugo now accuses Maria of paying for the murder of her husband, Thomas Della Riva.
She gave me $1,500, and we were planning to use that money to give to Armando to kill my uncle. Well, where's the money at? Well, my car got towed, it got impounded because I didn't have a license. I'm like, okay, you're telling me all this stuff, but did you give the money to Armando? I said, well, I approached Armando a long time ago, and he said, yes, I'll kill him, but it'll cost you $1,500. So I was giving him $50 here, $25 here, and I'm thinking, buddy, that doesn't make sense. Are we gonna find Armando? Well, yes, you are.
Investigators must now find Armando and establish his role in the murder of Thomas Della Riva. Perris, Riverside County, California. 40-year-old construction worker Thomas Della Riva has been found murdered in his pickup truck by the side of the road. Detectives have uncovered an affair between his wife Maria and his teenage nephew Hugo. Hugo has admitted to planning his uncle's murder with a man called Armando.
Homicide detectives transported Hugo to a location.
Intense and mellow, noisy and quiet. The river doesn't understand me. Waves find their way to the ocean. All the waves of the past. And the next day it was still the same. The desire for love. Recovery in a child's chest.
Armando was not identified as a suspect in this case.
Armando could have been just another person. He probably just threw the name out there.
With Armando now firmly ruled out as a suspect, investigators choose an unusual tactic to try and unravel the web of lies being spun by Hugo and Maria.
I go back to Hugo, and I say, you're pointing a finger at her, she's pointing a finger at you. You probably need to talk to Maria. You probably need to kind of set this straight. I went to Maria and I said, Hugo wants to talk to you. You okay with that? She goes, yeah, I want to talk to him. I'm fine with that.
Maybe something's just not clicking. We'll put those two people together in a room and they'll start talking, whispering, and that's being monitored.
I brought Hugo in and I said, Maria's sitting there. Hugo, I want you to sit over here. I don't want you guys walking towards each other. Please talk, but there's no touching.
And you're watching for just little things that are suspicious, and you use that information against them.
They start talking to each other. He tells Maria, why did you say everything? I was going to take the blame for it. And Maria's like, well, I told you not to do it. You know, I told you not to get me involved. I told you not to do it. And they're talking details about the murder. Hugo, a couple times, got up and started walking towards her. Of course, I'm sitting there watching it. So I go in there and I kind of make it look like I'm not watching, you know, because they don't know we're watching. Knock on the door. I go in and I'm like, I told you guys, I don't want you doing that. Getting close. I need you to sit here. I need you to sit over there. That's it. So I break them up and they start talking again. Hugo ended up wanting a hug from her, and obviously she didn't want nothing to do with him. That got close to the point we were able to break it up and put them back in their corners so they could talk again. And that went to the point where, okay, we got enough.
Investigators now believe they have enough evidence to arrest Hugo and Maria for the murder of Thomas Della Riva.
We told them, you're under arrest for the homicide of your husband, the homicide of your uncle.
You still have to corroborate that. You have to take your bits and pieces of evidence that you've developed, and you finally get to a point, it may not all be done, but you can see the picture, and you just take it from there.
I booked them into Robert Presley Detention Center, which is downtown Riverside. From there, they could have been moved anywhere within Riverside County.
With Hugo and Maria now in custody, investigators must gather all the evidence available to them to build the strongest possible case.
In Riverside County, when we have a homicide, we have a team of 5 people. You have a lead investigator, a case agent, you have someone who's going to process the scene, and then you have 2 extra investigators that will canvass or help process the scene also.
We had gone to Winchester for the original Armando search warrant. Then we also went to an address on Hennessy in the city of Paris, which is where Maria and the victim lived. Froze the location in anticipation of a search warrant.
I authored the search warrant. We went later on that day and processed the house with one of our forensic technicians.
Investigators conduct a detailed crime